implied threat to go right up to the... What would you think? What would you think if the Soviet Union were to hold massive maneuvers right at the U.S.-Mexico border? Okay, if Mexico had an alliance with, I know they're in the North American Union now, you know, the North American Free Trade Association, where they're trying to make a union. Isn't it interesting that today, what tone-deaf blindness for Obama to meet with the Mexican president today and have a little kumbaya session? You know, the two amigos. They had the three amigos meeting a couple of weeks ago. What an amazingly stupid photo op for him to do, to drive home the idea that he's not working in our interests, but in the interest of foreign countries. But let's understand for a minute. Let's imagine that they weren't joined at the treaty, at the hip, and they had an alliance with Russia. What if Russia or China were holding massive military exercises right at the border of Mexico and Texas? Do you think we would feel threatened? Do you think we'd be alarmed about that? Do you think we would? They would just tell us it's just a drill. Nothing to worry about. We're not getting aggressive or anything. And as we went to break, I pointed out Hendrik, president of Estonia, one of the NATO member countries, said in response to what Donald Trump was saying, he said, "Well, Estonia is one of 5 NATO allies in Europe to meet its 2% defense expenditures commitment." Think about that. Only 5 European countries meet their 2% defense expenditure commitment. Only 5. And they can only come up with 2%. I mean, it's 2%. That's setting the bar pretty low, don't you think? Look at the massive amount of money that America spends on the military, and I think it's far too much. We have a military budget that is by far and away the largest budget. We have the largest army. We have the biggest expenditures. We just put out a new aircraft carrier. Well, it's not gone out. Actually, it's running about 2 years late, but there's been a new article talking about how it's been delayed now to, I think it's November of this year that it's supposed to go out. It was scheduled, I think, for September of 2014. A giant aircraft carrier, biggest one we've had, almost $13 billion. It's not launching planes as it's supposed to. We just put out another Navy ship not long ago that was supposed to be a stealth ship for close-in patrol. It broke down after 50 miles. They had to tow it back in. Give me a break. There's no backup on a military ship. This is a sorry state that we've gone to because of the military-industrial complex bleeding us dry with these boondoggles. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. On this 4th hour, we're going to go back to what's happening with foreign policy, the glimpses that we've seen of this from Donald Trump in the interview he gave yesterday with the New York Times and others. Before we do, real quickly, I just want to mention to you that we have started carrying Oakley products. That is premier eye protection sunglasses from Oakley. We have a line of several products that we're now selling at InfoWarsStore.com. Very premium, world-class products that you'll find there. As we point out, it's in their DNA to identify the problems, create inventions, and wrap those inventions in art. That's the way Oakley describes themselves, and everybody knows Oakley's reputation. Again, you can buy those products now at InfoWarsStore.com. As we were talking about NATO in the last break, you know, one of the people who came to Trump's defense, interestingly enough, was Nigel Farage. And one of the things that he said was, he said, "I think the American military the last few years has been pretty unhappy with their NATO allies who have just kept cutting their defense spending." He added that NATO was a wonderful vehicle to keep the peace in Europe for 60 or 70 years, but NATO now does need to redefine itself. What is it for? We don't have the Warsaw Pact. He says, "I'm pro-NATO, I'm pro-cooperation, but it's not a bad thing that we reassess what it's for." And of course, this has been something that's been talked about in many circles for quite some time. It's one of the reasons why they have gone out of their way to revive the Cold War with Russia, with these provocative moves in the Ukraine, the region, okay, now the country, and now the country Crimea, trying to push that. One of the things that happened, and I mentioned this in a special report, you can see it at Infowars.com, is a interesting insight into, again, Ted Cruz, the guy who has so many backers on Wall Street, the military-industrial complex. He had one of his backers here delegate from Texas, tried to put some language in the platform that would call for maintaining and increasing sanctions against Russia and providing lethal defense weapons to the Ukrainian military. And they report in the Washington Post that Trump staffers in the room, who weren't delegates, but who were there to oversee the process, intervened. They worked with pro-Trump delegates. They were able to get the issue tabled while they devised a method to roll back the language. And then she was put on the sideline, and she was kind of upset. She says, I was troubled when they put aside my amendment, and then they watered it down. I said, what's your problem with a country that wants to remain free? It seems like a simple thing. It's a very simplistic way to look at this. Clearly, either she doesn't understand what the Obama administration and George Soros and the military-industrial complex are doing in terms of trying to start another Cold War and perhaps a third world war in order to sell us gigantic ships that don't work, long-range bombers. You know, you can't make a case for long-range bombers and a lot of tactical nukes if you don't have a Cold War. You know, if you're just fighting their war on terror that they're creating. So they needed to go back and revive the Cold War again to start up those profit centers. You know, they've got a new profit center with the war on terror. And they can have a new profit center with the militarization of the police and creating a civil war here in this country, pitting Black Lives Matter against the police and equipping and arming both sides of them and encouraging that division. But they still want to have that old profit center back too, you know, because you can never have enough money or power with these people. So they have to revive the Cold War. And they point out, they said, what they did was they replaced her language calling for lethal defensive weapons with softer language that called for appropriate assistance. Because we don't want to be tweaking the nose of Russia to start another war. The American people understand that. There's a lot of people in the Democrat Party that should understand that. Should understand that Hillary Clinton does want to escalate things. She's as hawkish as any of the people at the upper level of the GOP. And if you don't want a third world war, don't vote for Hillary Clinton. If you want to try to de-escalate that tension, you've got one choice and one choice only. That's Donald Trump. They say Trump's view of Russia has been friendlier than most Republicans. He said he would get along very well with Vladimir Putin. And, you know, Hillary Clinton said, well, Vladimir Putin must be very happy must be rooting for a Trump presidency. I think he would, because I don't think anybody in their right mind wants a world war or a Cold War. And so and Hillary Clinton is not in her right mind. Here's some evidence she's not in her right mind. She has invited families. This is coming up now. The DNC is going to start the Democrat National Convention. They're going to have their 4 days, Monday through Thursday, next week in Philadelphia. We'll be there to cover it. She has now invited families of blacks killed by police to speak at the convention, but no families of police who were killed by blacks. No families of those who were killed by illegal immigrants. And you remember when these families spoke at the Republican National Convention on Monday night, the families who had members who had been killed by criminals who came into this country without being vetted. They just are able to walk across and come in. As a matter of fact, we've got Obama and John Kerry bragging about how they're going to bring 10,000 people from an area that we're at war with without vetting any of these people. They can't do it. They don't care to do it. They don't care if they're bringing in enemy combatants into this country. And they don't care if they're letting criminals come in through the southern border either that are not vetted, that are not controlled. And so the result of that is that you got a lot of people who have family members who were killed by these criminals that are being let in. Some of those people spoke on Monday night. And as they were speaking, pretty much every one of the broadcast channels and cable channels turned off of them. If you wanted to see them speak, you had to pretty much watch C-SPAN. They turned off of the families who were talking about their personal tragedy, and they started talking amongst themselves, the talking heads with CNN and others. I can guarantee you that when they have the families of blacks who've been killed by police that are going to be put up to tell their story on Monday night or Tuesday night, whenever they do it, that they will not cut away from those families. But here's what Philadelphia's police union chief said. Now, this is the city where the convention is going to be held. He blasted Hillary Clinton for inviting relatives of victims of police shootings to speak at the convention, but failing to include relatives of slain police officers. Wouldn't you think that if you wanted to heal the situation and the division, that you would show the tragedy on both sides? That you would say, yes, we have some innocent people here who died because of excessive use of force by government agents, and the government has responsibility to do something about it, which they don't do, by the way. But instead, what do we have? We have the government encouraging people to continue to shut down events and to stage their protest and to not let their voices be silenced after they have encouraged people to assassinate police officers on the street who are also totally innocent, who had nothing to do with any of these cases. They've encouraged this. They have allowed that to, and they're not going to let those families speak because they don't want healing. They want division. He goes on to say, the Fraternal Order of Police is insulted. We will not soon forget that the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton are excluding the widows and other family members of police officers killed in the line of duty who were victims of explicit, not implied racism. That's what he said. They were the victims of explicit racism, not the victims of implied racism. His name is McNesby. He also said that to win an election, Mrs. Clinton must pander to the interests of people who do not know all the facts, while the men and women they destroy are outside protecting the political institutions of this country. You see that? While they're in there having people portraying this as a one-sided issue, the police that they are demonizing are protecting them outside. Now, does that surprise you? Because these are the same people who protect themselves with personal and private and government paid for bodyguards and want to deny us our Second Amendment rights. Remember, we had O'Keefe going to staffers and congressmen who are, staffers of congressmen who are big gun control advocates, and the congressmen themselves, and saying, we're with a anti-gun group, and we would like for you to put out this sign in your neighborhood saying that you agree with us and you don't have any guns on your home. It's a gun-free zone. And they all demurred. As a matter of fact, one of the places the guy says, this is a pretty violent neighborhood. I don't want to advertise the fact that I'm disarmed. Oh, so he's a free rider on the people who do protect their home. See, that's part of the advantage that these people accumulate and accrue from people who do carry concealed, who do have arms at their homes to protect their homes. So the crooks don't know who has guns and who doesn't have it. So they're deterred to some degree by the fact they might break into a home where there's an armed homeowner. And he would like to not tell people that he is a gun-controlled Democrat and doesn't have any guns on his premises, okay? So that's the thing that's going on. While they're going to be protecting, while the police will be protecting Hillary Clinton, she will be demonizing them with the stories of families that have been killed by the police. And again, if you wanted to solve this problem, you would be talking about the innocent victims on both sides of this. There are issues that need to be solved, and we do need to change how the police interact. And it is the government who can do that. And it's the federal government who has been changing it for the worse. Now, at the same time, they're going to be inviting blacks. They're not going to be inviting the police to speak. And this is very interesting. They also are trying to cut down on the number of men at the DNC. They're so proud of their diversity, except diversity doesn't mean you, if you're a white or a male or a Christian or whatever. They don't want you. You're not wanted. Here's two guys from Vermont, hometown of Bernie Sanders. They were pretty upset. They were so upset that they were kicked out of the delegation because they were men that one of them filed a complaint. But then somebody in the DNC talked to him. They have a 26-member delegation, and they demanded at the DNC that it be equally split between men and women. They even have quotas for their little delegates going to their convention here. So they were the guys who were the sacrificial lambs, and they were thrown out. They were state senators, and they were thrown out. One of the guys said, Bernie was my political mentor. He was the first person I worked for when I graduated from college. I really came to age under him, so I'm really bummed out to not be able to watch him give a speech. But on the other hand, the rules are the rules, and life goes on, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to take this off. It's just going to bow to the political correctness, which I guess you would expect because you have